Yo, this is a motherfucker who needs no introduction. You are watching Breaking Records Radio.
Gotcha. That first time going in kind of a live setting, at least with the poetry, other than just showing it to your teammates and actually performing in
Yeah.
Wichita, what was that experience like? Did you know right away that you were going to end up doing this professionally, or wanted to do it professionally anyhow?
Yes. As soon as I wrote my first poem on the bus of that game, I was like, it's game over. It was the first time in my life that I felt like something came naturally. Like basketball was a choice. I had to mentally choose to work extremely, extremely hard. But when I wrote that first poem, and like I'd always been good at writing. Like I was the guy in college, like if someone like had a paper that was due, I'd be like, okay, you can pay me and I'll write it and I'll just make it sound good for you about the subject. I won't research it, but I can make it sound fire. So I've always been like really adept at like writing and just putting words together. So once I figured out that I could put them in like the rhyming pattern that I had done on that poetry, on that poem, the first one I wrote, I was like, okay, I think this is what I meant to do with my life.
Gotcha. I know you've spoken about it in different interviews in terms of that original kind of transition moment going from poetry to rapping, but can you break down that specific moment of what kind of got you interested in the music side of things rather than just doing it as a spoken word, I guess, poetry?
Yeah, so essentially what happened was I was at that time I wanted to be like my thing. I wanted to be like the Drake of poetry. I was creating like poetry, music videos, like all those things. I was trying to like just be that guy and make poetry cool, because I'm like I was saying to myself like, like shit, I'm a Division I college basketball athlete. I'm in great shape. Like, like I can make this marketable to the masses. But then I just started seeing that there wasn't really much replay value on it. And a poem is just sort of something you watch once and, that's it. Maybe you go to it a second time or a motivational video. But, I just started then, like that was when I started researching more into hip hop. It was like by that time I was like 22. And I started to see that, Tupac had started off with a lot of poetry as well. And I remember like I took like, it was like after work or before work one time, and I went to go watch the All Eyes on Me in like a small theater by myself. And then just seeing that like he had like started with poetry and all the things, and just like it sort of motivated me in a way to like want to transition my poetry into music, which is why like a lot of different songs that I have don't even have like hooks, like it's just like basically a poem. So it's like I started taking my poetry and putting it on actual beats and not just like ambient
Yeah.
music to help a poem, like,
Flow. Yeah, that's interesting because some of my favorite rappers started out in the poetry scene as well, in kind of one way or another, right? You talk about Tupac, and he was definitely writing poems, and a lot of his early poems have been published as well as of now. But
Yeah.
Even rappers, I one that comes to mind is Saul Williams. I'm a huge fan of Saul Williams, and he got his career also started through doing slam poetry events and Def Jam poetry, and being involved in that scene very, very actively before being persuaded into the kind of hip hop spectrum. And I think it breeds a different type of artist coming from that background.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like initially, like I had literally zero to no interest in ever rapping, or like
Yeah.
or making hip hop. I was far away removed because I just didn't feel like what was like. Because I remember when I was on the bus and I wrote that first poem, the content of that first poem was sort of a reflection of what was going on in like mainstream hip hop, but what's going in that sort of spectrum does not relate to my life for upbringing at all. So I never thought there was going to be a space for me to exist within like hip hop successfully, just because like I'm just far removed from what's popular.
Yeah.
So I stuck to the poetry. But then as I like continued to find like my own way, I saw how I could integrate my poetry into that. So I think just, yeah, definitely like right, starting off with poetry gives you a different, uh, it's like this, right? It's like, so a lot of like hip hop, you can't like a lot of my texts, you could sit down and read like a book.
Sure.
Like my Dear God song or the Joker song, you could literally read that to a class and they think you're reading from like a chapter of a book. But a lot of like, I think people who don't come from a poetical background, like you can't just go and read their lyrics. It wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I think poetry definitely helps in that aspect of just like figuring out how to like intertwine and put words together that really just like flows easily for someone to comprehend.
Yeah, the comprehension thing is an interesting factor. I always think of rappers like, yeah, even a rapper like Eminem or Master Ace, or you have these I think a few rappers that really have this talent of almost appearing just like they're talking to you, right? It's almost effortless. It comes off effortless. Obviously, a lot of effort goes into
Yeah.
actually constructing the material and the art, but for the listener and the audience, it's very effortless, right? It's almost that feeling when you're having a conversation with somebody and then one of your sentences actually accidentally rhymes with something else, and it just feels dope, right? Like it's like, oh shit, that rhymed.
Yeah.
It feels so good. And when somebody can make a whole song that just kind of happens to rhyme in that way, or it happens to be musical, but it ultimately it's still rooted in that conversation piece that the artist is having with the audience. I think that's a very powerful way of communicating with your fan base, and I think it creates some
Yeah.
of the most powerful art and some of the art that's able to resonate the most with their fan base. I grew up listening to Eminem, and it was a coping mechanism for me, more so than other hip hop artists. I could listen to other music in general, not even just hip hop, but I could listen to other music and enjoy it as music and get into a vibe or help me be productive throughout the day. But I could listen to certain rap songs because it helped me cope. And it was that element specifically of feeling like you were being talked to as a conversation. And I think that's an element that your music really ends up having as well. Whenever I listen to a song, you mentioned Dear God, but yeah, these are songs that feel like they're conversation pieces with the audience.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a really good point you made. Like my term that I call myself, but I've been calling myself whole life, is I call myself a simply complex person. Where it's like someone can listen to Dear God the first time and understand what I'm saying. But there's also, it's deeper than, like a 5-year-old can hear it and be like, I understand what he's saying. But then a 40-year-old can hear it and be like, I understand, but I understand how this is deeper than what it's just like, than just, even though it sounds simple, it's still very deep. So I think, yeah, just being able to relate messages to people, what I like to think, like a lot of like great, poets and artists do, is that like, however I'm feeling, like if I'm like, what I do, like my coping mechanism, whenever I get angry, anything I write diaries. Like I have like, the other day I was angry as shit. I wrote fucking like 8 in my phone, But what I do is that I'm able to, however I'm feeling, I'm able to express that in rhyme. So it's like, if, like I can just, and I think that's a skill in itself, just being able to express whatever you're feeling.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people have that.
Yeah, because sometimes it's hard to find the words.
Yeah.
I
hear you.
But yeah, I just like to be, but like simply, like, things, I think complex shit is dope. And sometimes it's dope to get crazy with the bars, but I think being able to just relate a message to a human being in a simple form and having them think of it one way when they're 18 and having them think of it a totally different way once they're 30.
Yeah.
Is special,